Yes. All right. It's on like Donkey Kong. It's about to rock some madness out here. Let's see. Yeah. Hello, Mr. Holman.
How are you, sir?
I'm cool, man. I'm cool, man. Came from work and just wanted to make sure everything was good. Um, Making sure that like we're all cool and stuff. I wore something and I debated on even asking you because I didn't want to make you sad or anything. I wore this as a tribute to you and your friend, man. I bought this years ago. Um, I thought it would be cool to wear it. John's art on this hoodie, so I'm like, let me wear it just for the occasion to
Yeah,
celebrate both of you.
as a matter of fact, I put on a T-shirt made by my bandmate Nicholas Taylor with me and
I want that shirt.
with me
That's
and
so dope.
Vincent, with me and Jean-Michel Basquiat backstage at Hurrah back in
Wow,
1979.
that's
T-shirt
rad,
made by my boy High Priest Nicholas Taylor, who
man.
he and I are the remainders of Gray.
Man, dude, yeah, man, that's so cool. Yeah, I let me know how much that shirt is. Oh, but that's so cool, man. Now I have to ask you, and I'm gonna probably I'm gonna definitely cover Gray, but I have to ask you about Gray. So are you guys still around, or and I'm gonna come back to Gray later. But are you guys still around, or like what's the deal with Gray now? Like,
Yeah, I mean, are you kidding? Yeah, we just damn, I should have. I have the record in my living room. I can run and get it. We just came out with a new album back in April called "Last of the Beats." Um,
sick.
yeah, as a matter of fact, everybody watching, you can enjoy a couple of works of art by Kenny Scharf over my right shoulder here. I'll be back in literally 30 seconds.
Yeah, and I'm gonna introduce him when he comes back. I really thank you guys for coming out. I really appreciate it. And if you guys have any questions, please don't be afraid to ask. That's what this is for. I like doing this because it gets the community involved, especially talking to legends like this brother right here. You know, he really paved the way for a lot of us, as many of you guys know, and I really appreciate that. Making sure I got all my notes. Yeah, I got them all. That's so rad. It's the raddest thing. Dude,
All right,
I
I'm
gotta get
back.
that
I'm
tape.
back.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, everybody.
That's cool. Michael Flip or Michael FIP says Michael Holman used to work with me and dance with me back in the 70s. Oh shoot. We're gonna
Who was
talk about
that?
all the
Who was that? Who
Michael
said that?
FIP.
Hey, what's up, Distract? Distract is really cool cat who animation, a brother who makes animation.
Right on, right on. Well,
Did
Michael,
Gray
can I
invent experimental hip hop?
oh
Some people have said that. I don't know if that's true or not, but some people have said it. This is the new album called Last of the Beats.
wow.
Yeah, you can get it on go to Amazon, Gray, Last of the Beats. And there's a lot of
Man,
reflection here, but that's what the album. What's interesting is this contraption here is a shopping cart that's made into an artwork piece of art that you plug it in and oh, Michael Springer, yeah, what's up, Michael? And you plug it in and this electric motor broke sent this axle around inside this spring, and it bounced around and made the most violent noise.
I did.
And we actually, for Leo Castelli's birthday party, a very important art gallerist who basically discovered Andy Warhol, for Leo Castelli's 78th birthday party, we performed, and Jean-Michel Basquiat played this thing, and
Sick.
it was just it was sick. It was crazy.
Any
This is our
video?
album
Like,
that we came out with back in 2019. It's Grand
man,
Anthology. It's a triple album that includes our first album, Shades Up. So yeah,
mm,
dig it.
that's so cool. Mind if I introduce you? Always, and I hope you did get. And if I mess up on anything, please correct me. So some of you guys know, but some of you guys might not know. But I'm gonna introduce anyway, and I hope I do justice by doing so. Intro, Michael Holman. Just, this is my intro. All right. La, 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 la.
Come on, you can
Musician,
do it. Let's
writer,
do it. Let's go. Let's go.
musician, writer, filmmaker, dancer, choreographer, producer, performed with bands such as The Tubes and Gray. He's the first to mention hip hop in print, to make a film about hip hop, and have a TV show based on hip hop. He's also, I would, he's also, for me personally, I also would say he's the conduit and the first to actually cross hip hop in the rock to the rock and roll world, and making hip hop going global. And his works are also in the National Museum for African American History and Culture, and the Lincoln Center feature his work as well. He's responsible for films like Beat Street, a film, and the film about Basquiat, as well as produced TV shows for Nickelodeon, children's shows such as Blue's Clues and Eureka's Castle.
Castle. Yeah, a couple of corrections on there though. It's true that I was the first person to use the term hip hop in a publication. It was January 1982 in the East Village Eye. Don't get it twisted. I did not come up with that term. I was just the first person to use it in an interview with DJ Africa Bambaataa, and we defined it together. I was the writer, he was the interviewee. I don't know what you said about rock and roll and hip hop.
Well,
I think that's Run DMC's doing that.
I'll be honest.
Walk This Way.
Here's the thing. I have a theory about that. And this is something that I was going to bring up to you later, but I might as well put it out there right now. Everybody starts it with Run DMC, and I'm not taking no props from them, and I'm going to eventually get to this talking about No Wave. I think what you did, you really crossed hip hop into that realm where it's almost like, and it was kind of a really sweet spot because, I mean, I'm a child of the early 80s. I kind of remember certain things, even though I got into hardcore and stuff a little bit later, but I was in the new wave and I was pop locking and all that stuff back in the 80s. I'm from LA. Right. But reading about you, I can see the intersection between punk and hip hop. And seriously, there's bands like The Clash, cats like Captain Sensible and, even, John Lydon, and of course your friend Malcolm, that they ended up doing hip hop type stuff. Also thinking about like underground bands like Conk and even Liquid, who of course Grandmaster Flash sampled it. I think, and this is just my personal theory, before even Run DMC, like you, I think had a part in that. And I don't know, like that's probably a new theory, but that's what I saw just studying on you. That's what I think.
Here's how I would react to that. I would just say that I was part of a community, and I'd like to include my friend Fab Five Freddy, who really introduced me to the game. By the game, I mean hip hop culture. Myself, Fab Five Freddy, Charlie Ahern, Henry Chalfant, Martha Cooper, we were a bunch of downtown cats and kiddies who were instrumental in bringing hip hop culture downtown to the downtown no wave punk, post-punk scene that was going on in Lower Manhattan. And yes, I was very much a part of that. I cannot by any means take any singular responsibility. I was also a producer on Beat Street, as you said, but I was not responsible for Beat Street. I was just one of many producers. So, I was part of a community, both downtown and reaching uptown, that yes, did some of the many of the things that you're talking about. This intersection between punk and hip hop was just going on when, I brought Malcolm McLaren up to meet Bambaataa. And then, later on, John Lydon, Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols did a little something with Bambaataa on record. And, so, but I was just part of a community that was engaged in this, like you said, intersection between no wave, new wave punk and hip hop, a real do-it-yourself mentality. All these cultures and all these communities were really based on do it yourself, working class, poor kids, making things happen, alchemists, making things happen from thin air, just from their own imaginations and work ethic. And then there were people like me who kind of came in a little bit later and, helped celebrate it and help package it, if you will, and help spread it around the world.
I was gonna say, and yeah, I should have mentioned imprinted a magazine. That's kind of what I meant, because I knew like the origins of the name hip hop for sure. I mean, like, you know, I've heard Melly Mel talk about it, and like, I've seen other documentaries on it. But in a magazine, I should have mentioned that, just based off of what I've read about you. And it's really cool. That's still important, you know. But yeah, I really appreciate it, man. You know, like just what your work, and the fact that, again, it's community that's really a good thing. I myself work in my community with the things that I do. So I totally understand that. And man, now I got some, we're going to go back, way back. And it goes a little something like this. Hit it. What's the earliest memory of what got you into music? I have to ask this.
That got me into music? Uh, well, as you said, you know, I was a part of that band, a theatrical rock band out of San Francisco called the Tubes, and their origins were really in Phoenix, Arizona. That my participation with the Tubes was much more of a dancer, working with the director and choreographer of the Tubes, Kenny Ortega, who years later blew up as a director and choreographer of films like, you know, Dirty Dancing and you know, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and choreographing for, you know, Michael Jackson, directing Michael Jackson's last 10 years of live performances. Kenny Ortega and I were part of that band. That was really kind of where I kind of cut my teeth in terms of music performance, and the Tubes were really fascinating because they were a theatrical rock band that every song they did on stage had dancers and props and sets and costumes and a narrative and a storyline. So, and that really has never happened again. I don't know anybody that did that. That really got me excited about music on stage and performance on stage. But it was the whole picture, you know, with the Tubes. When I graduated from school, after I was in the Tubes for a year during 1975, and then went back to school and graduated from the University of San Francisco, and then moved to New York City in 78. In a year later, in 79, I accidentally, at this party, the Canal Zone party, got to meet someone who really changed my life, Jean-Michel Basquiat. We met in the most interesting and funny way at this event, at this party. And one of the first thing he asked me was, do you want to start a band? And that band was Gray, and that was April 29th, 1979. So it was funny because at this time, I've got a foot downtown in the new wave punk, post-punk, fine art world of Lower Manhattan, and the fascination with and an interest in what was going on uptown in the Bronx. And so I was living both these lives, you know, as a person interested in the avant-garde, as well as interested in the beginnings of hip hop culture. And so I'd have to say that the first time I really thought seriously to answer your question, I tend to have long
Cool.
answers to things, but they tend to answer 4 or 5 questions at one shot.
And you really have.
The time that I really took performing and writing and making music myself would be when, you know, I co-founded the band Gray with Jean-Michel Basquiat, April 29th, 1979. It was, you know, Jean had, when I say Jean, I mean Jean-Michel Basquiat. All of his friends called him only by that name, Jean. He tried to get into the Lounge Lizards, which was John Lurie's band, and, you know, different bands that were on the scene at the time, new wave bands, punk bands that really didn't really know how to play music. It was always just kind of this kind of like anti-music, you know, kind of like punk, like 3 chords and just very simplistic styles of music. And no one ever, you know, the Lounge Lizards wouldn't let him be in the band. They were more of a jazz band. And I think he decided, well, let me start my own band. And I think he knew at that party that I'd been involved in the Tubes, and he really was a big fan of the Tubes People knew about the Tubes back in '75. And I think that's why he asked me to start a band with him, because he knew the Tubes had this art connection and this kind of like, you know, surreal performance, you know, beyond just music. And I think that's why he asked me, but I'll never know because I never found out. But we started the band that night, and our approach was forget about all the other bands on the scene and they're trying to play instruments they couldn't play. We knew we couldn't play the instruments, so we intentionally our approach to playing the music was like deconstructing music. We were like aliens from another planet looking at a guitar, wondering how to play it, and just making sounds from it, and using a metal file. Jean would take a metal file and run it across the loosened strings of a guitar. I'd pull masking tape off of a drum head that had a microphone with a reverb and an amplifier. And so we made these soundscapes. We were much more into finding ways to make unexpected, unexplored music from instruments, traditional instruments, finding new ways to make traditional instruments sound like something from out of this world.
That's so cool.
That was my first approach to, you know,
that's
to Gray, to music.
To me, that's punk rock. And it's funny because I had a question on here, and I'll be honest, you kind of answered it, but I still want to ask that question. With the whole no wave thing, would you feel like it was a part of punk or reaction to it, or both? And also maybe a middle finger to the term new wave, you know? And I was going to mention the Canal Zone, which you talked about, but I was curious about that question. And then it seems like with Gray, you guys were almost a reaction to the whole no wave thing.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think you're right. And again, I was there for all of this, and yet I still don't know the answer to all these questions because I don't think anybody really knows the answers. But yeah, I would say that no wave was a middle finger to new wave. New wave was something that happened after punk. Like it was like, well, punk's over, let's do something else. And then new wave and no wave and new romantics out of England was like a whole. Those are three different reactions to punk. And Gray was a middle finger to all of it. We were just like,
that's awesome.
You know, you had to be in Gray. The requirements to be in Gray was, first of all, that you weren't a musician, that you had no real formal musical training, because we didn't want that to get in the way of our looking to deconstruct music. We didn't want like some formal musicianship to get in the way of like our ignorance, which is what we love to call like if you did something that Jean really loved the sound of, he'd go, man, that was ignorant, and it was the greatest compliment. And what ignorant meant, the definition of ignorant was doing something that shouldn't work but works brilliantly, doing something that you know, that's wrong, and yet it's new and beautiful and no one's ever thought of it before, and it's so unique. Your execution of this ignorance is so personal and so you. And you know, there are moments, maybe that'll happen even in this conversation, I'll go, yo, that was ignorant, but I'll have to wait and see. I'm not going to force it. But let me tell you, man, early Gray, we were ignorant. We were definitely ignorant.
Man, that sounds so cool. And I'll say this, and not to put me out there, but I relate to it because I'm a music teacher myself, and I use improvisation to introduce my students to playing. And some of them are shy. And I'm like, nah, just go on the instrument. I don't care what you play. Then we start from there. And you know, like I'm inspired by like a lot of what you're talking about, whether it be, I know like a lot of free jazz guys and classical, these avant-garde classical cats like Schoenberg and Penderecki and all that, and Ornette Coleman. They had a method to their madness, but I'm taking it from an amateur approach. So I guess that's kind of punk. I don't know. So hearing that, it's just like, that's amazing, man. And you know, like.
That's interesting that you mentioned Schoenberg, the atonal guy, right?
Yeah.
He's my hero. On this album, the song Rene Ricard, who was one of our good friends back in the day, who was the first person to really write about Jean-Michel Basquiat and helped make him famous. There's a song that Nick and I wrote that we dedicated to Rene Ricard, and Suzanne Malouk, who we call the Widow Basquiat. She's playing atonal piano on that. So
yes.
yeah, and she doesn't know how to play the piano, and yet what she does is beautiful. It works.
That's amazing. That's so cool, man. It's almost like you guys are like, we're just gonna do this and just make something that no one's done. And it's almost like, you get some cats that kind of have a little arrogance about what they do. But I think it's cool that you guys didn't in that regard, because you're bringing music back to the people in that regard. I'm not saying maybe it's just, you're not even tripping on anything like that. It's just like, hey, like, let's just go way out. And it's just real cool. That's, for me, that's what improvisational music and experimental music is. I have to ask you, do you have any, or even, I read this book called The Quick Killing in Art a long time ago about Jean, and I know that he was into jazz. What were you into, or like, were you guys all coming from the same place or different places, or,
We were coming from all different kind of places. I don't know I know Toni Basil very well. I love her. She's so important to early
Tony,
LA
awesome.
dance, Campbell locking, the whole Lockers. And she's done a lot of amazing things in film and whatnot. This guy, Michael Flip, is mentioning Toni Basil. Anyway, but back to your point, the music I listen to, it's kind of crazy. I mean, first of all, I love anything that's great. Any kind of, it could be classical, it could be, avant-garde music. It can be Stockhausen, it can be John Cage, it can be the Beatles, it can be James Brown, it can be whomever. As long as that track is good. Take the Rolling Stones, for example. The Rolling Stones, before Brian Jones died, were amazing. And then, when they did songs like, God, now that I'm asking myself to come up with these titles, I can't think of anything. But pre Brian Jones' death is is incredible. And then after he died, so they became a country western band, and I had no love for them anymore.
Wow.
So that's an example of, like, I love everything except until it's not cool anymore. I mean, there's a lot of music there's a lot of genres, I suppose, that I never got into, like new romantic music. I can't think of anything.
You didn't like
Duran
Duran or Spandau Ballet? No Spandau Ballet, no Duran Duran, no Visage?
Nah. That's not new romantic, but that's not new romantic anyway, is it?
Steve Strange was a part of that scene.
Okay,
and like,
but not Duran. They weren't romantic.
Earlier Duran Duran was like, they even mentioned it in like one of their songs, so yeah, they were kind of a part of that. Like, okay. I like that fashion, like that whole new romantic fashion is really cool. And then the goth thing is so total dark. Like,
well, that reminds me of me taking Malcolm McLaren up to the Bronx, up to Bronx River Projects for a Zulu Nation throwdown, dressed completely. He was dressed completely Tribe Called Quest. Absolutely, yeah.
DNA.
Q-Tip. Q-Tip. It's funny. I was at a retrospective at Gagosian Gallery for Basquiat, and Q-Tip, I'd never met him before. I knew who he was. He came up to me. I'll never forget this. This meant the world to me. He came up to me and he said, "I just want you to know that graffiti rock made me want to become a rapper." And I was like, wow, like, blew my mind. Like, because I always had issues with graffiti rock. I could have done it better, or, if I had an opportunity to really have it as a series, how I would have improved it, how I would have made it more authentic, blah, blah, blah. And so I always had mixed feelings about it, as any creator does, I think, about their work. So when Q-Tip, who must have been like 12 years old when Graffiti Rock came out, sees it and wants to become a rapper, probably because he sees Run DMC or Mo D or Special K from the Treacherous Three, to know that my TV show made him want to do that. And then my TV show was part of somebody like Q-Tip becoming important and famous and and making incredible music. I mean, you know, what can I say, man? I could
That's
die happy.
amazing.
But I changed subjects. I'm sorry. What was
Yeah,
that? What were you saying?
and we're gonna come back to graffiti rock. I wanted to message your homeboy Michael Flip. Spaz Attack is awesome. I wish we could find him. I don't know where he is. Tony Basil's homie that was doing all the roboting and popping and stuff. He mentioned Spaz earlier. And graffiti rock, man. We're gonna talk about graffiti rock for sure. But you mentioned Malcolm McLaren going to the Bronx. I gotta hear this story.
As a pirate on Penn. That's what I was saying. I took him up to the Bronx with Rory Johnston, who was also part of RCA Records, which Bow Wow Wow was on that label, and that's why he was in New York to promote this future gig at a club called the Ritz, and so he was in town during the summer, and the gig is going to be in September, and I had this opportunity to take him up to the Bronx. And I picked him up at his hotel with Rory Johnston. They're both dressed like pirates of the Penzance on acid. And I'm like, oh no, we're gonna get Vicked. We're gonna get mad Vicked in the boogie down. But nothing happened. It all turned out great. I got to introduce him to Bambaataa, and he got and to Jazzy J and Ike C, who was on the mic, and explained to him what this was all about. And he said, I'm gonna give you, you know, $3,000 budget to do a hip hop. We didn't call it hip hop at that time, but to do an opening act, an opening review of this culture that I introduced him to open up for Bow Wow Wow, and it included Rocksteady Crew, who I was like an unofficial agent for, getting them gigs and looking out for them a bit. Henry Chalfant was their actual manager. It was Bambaataa on turntables, Jazzy J on special mix turntables, turntablism, Ike C on the mic, showing my film, the first hip hop film called called Catch a Beat, short film, not like Wild Style, which was a real feature film, but my film Catch a Beat was the first hip hop film, and it was short. It was 4 minutes long, and it featured It featured the battle of Rocksteady and Dynamic Rockers at Lincoln Center, and a bunch of other stuff that I put together with titles and whatnot. Short film. The first hip hop film was a short, 81. Showed the film. Rocksteady Crew was breaking, thanks to my relationship with Crazy Legs, and he's such an important pioneer. Like I said, Bambaataa on playing records, Jazzy J doing turntablism. We didn't call it turntablism at the time, and Ike C on the mic. And what was historic about that was the first actual hip hop event performance in front of an audience. And the reason why it was the first, because years before this, before I even knew about any of this, you had MCs and DJs performing at clubs up in the Bronx. There's no question about that. That would have been called hip hop years later, but not breakers and not graffiti artists. And we had all of that at that party, at that opening event for Bow Wow Wow. So that was historic. So weirdly, the very first truly all hip hop event that happened in front of a paying audience was downtown, not up in the Bronx, because we embraced all the elements. Clubs uptown, they embraced rappers, they embraced DJs. They didn't want any breakers in there. They didn't want any graffiti artists in there. It was the downtown kids that saw this movement as multifaceted. And we've always seen hip hop as a multifaceted movement with all the elements, not just rap, which is what most people today think hip hop is. They think it's rap is hip hop and hip hop is rap. No. Hip hop is all the elements. Anyway,
It's funny
I'm digressing here.
Oh no, you're cool. Because I was gonna mention that like I've been, I'm actually like, and I'm gonna ask you some dance questions too, because I'm actually I was born in '74, so I started popping probably about like very early '80s, like around '81, '82. Started breaking in '83, but then reading about and doing research about like just the origins of the dance, and then finding out about like I knew about Crazy Legs and the Rocksteady Crew, shouts to those cats, but then finding out about like people like Beaver and Trixie and all these other cats that, you know, and then out here on the West Coast, we had lockers. Like my uncles were part of the Keystone Lockers. And I was going to ask you about this because you're from Carson. And you said in one interview I remember watching that you were a locker. So I know that that stuff. So even thinking about that, when it comes to hip hop, it's kind of a trip because out here on the West Coast, we weren't just popping at one point, like in especially like around '83, '84. That's when I started breaking. We were popping and breaking, so it seemed like that was kind of a part of the culture. And I always look at hip hop like this. It was born out of basically a culture, a foundational Black American culture that started from soul and funk. Um, and it was that wave that hit in the '60s and '70s. Um, but then everybody else like came in and they put their input into it. Like, but as far as the start of hip hop, what would you say in that regard, just when it comes to that, especially being a locker here on the West Coast? And did you, I know it's, everybody has their regional things, is even when it comes to music, because there's Detroit house and like, you know, but some of these dances kind of coalesced in a lot of ways. And one interview that you mentioned, James Brown, and how important he was to, and I think he was important to all of it, and Soul Train, and you know, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, you just brought up a whole like 18 different ideas
Sorry,
here,
I always
but
do
that's
that.
okay. I mean, that's me. That's me too. I'm the same way. Um, you know, like a lot of people that know that are in the game that know me know that I'm not from the Bronx. I'm not from New York. You know, I came to New York in 1978. I'm from Cali. You know, I was from the Bay Area, but I lived in LA from 71 through 73. And that was like a really critical time. So I'm fully aware, and I would visit the East Coast, and I'm fully aware, and people need to understand that popping, locking, the robot, all these things are West Coast dances. They're not East
Yep,
Coast dances. I mean, there are East Coast kids who are good at it, who are great at it, like Mr. Wave and you know, Mr. Wiggles.
Mr. Wiggles is
Uh,
dope.
you know, Mr. Wiggles is nasty. Mr. Wave is incredible as a popper, and Wiggles can do everything. But they're East Coast. These are West Coast dances, and they were going on, in my opinion, before breaking really established itself. You know, the West Coast had its own thing,
Yeah.
had its own dance, and I saw popping and locking become incorporated gradually into hip hop dance
Mm.
in the early '80s. This West Coast had got involved in the East Coast, in the East Coast styles. But in my mind, there'll always be West Coast dances. I mean, I was a locker in high school. I went to Narbonne High School in Torrance, and you know that's L.A., man. And I was like,
Shouts to
we
Darvon.
were popping because that's what you did.
I'm in
But
Long
we didn't only just, I
Beach.
mean, not popping, but I mean locking. But
Yeah.
not only did we lock, but we did the Rock Steady, we did the Penguin, we did, the Goodfoot. We did all these dances that in many cases, they were James Brown's inventions. And when you talk about James Brown, in my opinion, hip hop culture rests on the shoulders of James Brown. Without James Brown, what created hip hop culture, in my opinion, are the park jams in the summer that happen in the Bronx. People bringing the turntables out, partying. Some say that the peace treaties that came brought about by Yellow and Black Benji, by the Ghetto Brothers, bringing that peace treaty allowed for a peaceful environment in the Bronx where people could actually start partying together. And before, they were fighting each other. Now a lot of these gangs were putting their colors down and just partying, having a good time. The Black Spades, where Bambaataa came, which Bambaataa was involved in. These are all these gangs that were like putting down the colors and picking up turntables, picking up microphones, et cetera, just dancing, having a great time.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, the term hip hop was coined by the rapper Cowboy from Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, and it was just a spoof. A friend of his was going into the military, just got drafted in, or might have enlisted in the army, and he said, "Uh-oh, now he's going to be marching. Now he better have a good time tonight, because tomorrow he's going to be hip hop, left, right, 1, 2, hip hop," and it just kind of like a snowball going downhill. It started to get traction and started to be used often, but it was a pejorative term for a long time. People were like, "I don't want to go to one of those hip hop shit in the park. I want to go downtown and see the Gap Band or see Luther Vandross." Hip hop in the Bronx was still underground and was still a rebellious movement, even in the Bronx. Most people in the Bronx were like people everywhere else. They wanted to be down with, whatever the latest thing was, Funkadelic, the Gap Band, like I said, whatever was happening. And these kids in the parks, the Bambatas and the Grandmaster Flashes and the Cool Hercs, who were playing 10-year-old James Brown records, most people didn't want to know about it. That was old. That was past.
Yeah.
So it was really these underground, really interesting young middle school kids who recognized the power and the beauty and the genius of these 10 and 15-year-old funk tracks by James Brown and by Jimmy Castor Bunch, and by weird tracks by like English bands like Babe Ruth, that made the Mexican, and obscure beats that people were crate digging back then in the 70s and later 70s, finding these tracks. And they were doing it, and the core of early hip hop, the core was the DJ. He was the one, in some cases she was the one who set the stage, and they were playing those records for the B-boys and B-girls. And I'm telling you, there were many artists. My good friend Shah Rock, who's one of the most important early,
she's awesome,
pioneering first female. She told me she was a B-girl before she was a rapper. So the point is that hip hop is built on these park jams with DJs playing old records for the dancers, for the B-boys. Later on came the MCs hyping the DJ and hyping the dancers, hyping the party. But they weren't the stars. The DJ was the star and the dancers were the stars. The graffiti artists, they blended into all this because many of the different people who were artists in these other elements also tagged their names, but they were around for decades. I mean, hundreds of years. Yeah. Graffiti goes back thousands of years. But the real foundation is the DJ for early hip hop cultures. The DJ, and then the graffiti artist, and then the B-boys. And I've said this 100 times. When it comes to spreading the culture internationally, globally, the B-boys were the lost leaders of hip hop culture. People wanted to see the B-boys before they wanted to see anything else, because a DJ, there's nothing, on paper, there's nothing that unusual about a DJ. Nothing to go run and see. Somebody like spitting rhymes on a mic, on paper, there's nothing really that is revolutionary there on paper. Graffiti artists, like I said, were around for a long time. Somebody coming around spinning on their heads, now that's something that an audience outside of New York wanted to see. And that's why the B-boys were the lost leaders of hip hop culture. My crew, New York City Breakers, awesome. What that's about.
That's your book. I see. That's the book I was going to bring up. Like, I got to get that book. I didn't even know about that book until later, but I'm like that. And then the artwork and everything, man, I got to get that. I got to give a shout out to some of the earlier pioneers, like, of course, Disco King Mario, John Brown, and Smokey, and all those cats that kind of paved the way for a lot of it too. And it's amazing because, like,
DJ Flowers,
that
whole set, yeah,
all
the
those
Disco
cats, man.
Twins from Queens, and these cats were all over Manhattan. They weren't just from the Bronx. I mean, they were coming out of all over New York City. They were coming out of Queens. They were coming out of Brooklyn, like DJ Flowers, Disco Twins were out of Queens, you know, Manhattan, the Bronx. And the reason why that is because experiencing, you know, urban Black music and culture on the West Coast, in the Bay Area, and also in Los Angeles, there wasn't a big difference between what we were going through in the late 60s and early 70s in LA, in San
Yep.
Francisco, in Philly, in Chicago, and in New York. There wasn't a big difference. But but what's fascinating though is, why did hip hop happen in New York? Why didn't it happen in Houston or Chicago or any major black city? It's because New York made hip hop happen, because of the many different tribes in New York. I mean, you cannot create hip hop without the Puerto Rican tribe, without Puerto Rican people and their influence. You can create soul music with just Black people. You can create soul music out of and look at what happened in Chicago, or look at what happened in Memphis with Stax Records, or Detroit with Motown. That's all Black. Those are all Black people making that music. But when you talk about hip hop, and you talk about the kind of music that is hip hop music, and some of these bands are like a bunch of white hippies from London or from England, like Babe Ruth making The Mexican, and that's a legitimate hip hop track. The influences that make hip hop, it's New York. And why New York? And what is special about New York? It's a city in which the different tribes, the different ethnic groups, whether they be Black, whether they be Southern Blacks that had migrated to New York, whether they were Caribbean Blacks, whether they were Caribbean Latinos or Puerto Ricans, whether they were Asian, Chinese, with Kung Fu influencing breaking. Are you kidding? Whether they be Jewish or Irish or Italian, all these tribes in New York, unlike other cities, live side by side, because it's such an old city. They live one block, it's all Greek in the Bronx, and the next block it's Puerto Rican, and the next block, and everybody mixes together, and everybody gets a flavor from each other, and it feeds off of each other. And so when you look at cities like Los Angeles or Chicago or Houston, Black people in Los Angeles are warded off. It's either in Watts or in Compton or Inglewood. In Houston, Black people are warded off, Fifth Ward. Chicago, South Side. That's not the way it is in New York. That's not how New York rolls. New York, everybody's rolling together. And so this constant blending of cultures that happens in New York, block by block by block, and the influence. I just saw an interview with Gil Scott Heron, saying, "Yeah, I used to hang out in these projects right here, and like when the sun went down, all the Latinos would be coming out with their congas and their bongos and everything else, and that really influenced my music." That's a perfect example of why hip hop happened in New York, because you have so many cultural influences influencing and inspiring each other. Now, the basis of it is soul music, is James Brown, and it's Black, and it's African, and it's Southern, because it's James Brown. But left to, if you just leave it there, then you've got Chicago, you've got Philly, you got Chicago with the Chicago sound, and you've got house, and you've got all kinds of different things like that. You've got Philly created disco, but they didn't. LA's got this amazing West Coast soul. Houston has its own sound, but it ain't hip hop. Hip hop is more than music. It's visual, it's a dance, it's clothing, it's style, it's New York. I'm sorry, I'm not a New Yorker. I mean, I am a New Yorker because I've lived there for 40 plus years, but I'm not a native New Yorker. I'm not bragging on New York. I'm telling you, as an outsider who moved to New York, there's no city in the world that's more hip and smart and clever and inventive than New York City. There's just no place. And there's no city in the world where you have middle school kids, latchkey kids, oftentimes with only one parent, with growing up in the 70s when the whole entire government abandoned them. There was no money for education. There was no money for music classes. There was no money for physical education classes. These kids were left on their own. And they were geniuses. They're geniuses. They came up with hip hop. Nobody else did that anywhere else in the world, anywhere else in the country. They came up with hip hop. And it wasn't just black Southern blacks who migrated to New York. You'd be insane to not include Caribbean blacks. When Kool Herc is from Jamaica, when Bambaataa, Mo D, Kool Mo D, Grandmaster Flash, they're all Caribbean native. They're all second generation Caribbean. What are you going to say to that? What are you going to say? I mean, the Puerto Ricans who influenced it in terms of style, in terms of dance, in terms of and believe me, I'm telling you, it's not just blacks and Puerto Ricans and Latinos. It's Asians in New York. It's New York itself. It's New York itself. I don't know if New York sits on some kind of strange quartz vein that gives it some kind of special energy that aliens are beaming down into New York. But there's no place like it. And a lot of people say, oh man, well, the 80s are over in New York. It's not what it used to be. That's true. It's not what it used to be. It's still badass. It's still the most genius place. Kids, native New Yorkers who grow up there, they grow up fast. You know what's interesting too about this? New York, if you compare the bands, if you start from the 60s on, if you leave the late 50s behind, if you forget about the 50s and the Brill Building music like Carole King and the Drifters and Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers and Tears on My Pillow. Who am I thinking of? And all those girl bands and everything, there was like a moment in New York that New York was the center of the world. It was always the center of the world for film, for everything else. It was always, what's New York doing? But then it died out, and the places where soul music and funk music comes from is everywhere else but New York. And disco too, everywhere else but New York. You know why? Because those are cities and smaller towns like Gary, Indiana, where the Jackson Five are from. These are smaller cities in smaller states that do not move as fast and are not as kinetic as New York, and are not as intense as New York. And so people, and many of these places are where the Black migration moved. Memphis is a location for that. Detroit, of course. Chicago, of course. Philadelphia, of course. A lot of people think Memphis, it all started. No, Memphis was a location for the Great Migration. Boston, New York. This is where people migrated. And in these other places, other than New York, it was not as fast a city. Oakland, Los Angeles, West Coast, no doubt. They had the time to ruminate and to put together bands and to have a job and to work on their music. And when they made it, when something clicked, that's when they brought it to New York and showcased it. But New York can't compare to all these other places when it comes to creating music until hip hop. Ohio, thank you. Ohio players. Ohio put out more music than New York. New Jersey put out, Funkadelic comes from New Jersey. All the great soul and funk music comes from everywhere else but New York. But New York synthesized with hip hop. New York found a way to put it all together into one message. That was hip hop. It's fascinating to me. There's only a handful of bands that came out of New York in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s that's worth anything. The Moments, Black Ivory, who, What's a guy, Funkin' for Jamaica, that song, which is not a huge song. Everybody else came from Philly. Everybody else came from Chicago. Everybody else came from the West Coast. Everyone else came from the South, from Atlanta, from Athens, from Georgia. James Brown. Everyone came from somewhere else because that's where you could take time to build something. Yeah, James Brown from South Carolina originally, but he considered Georgia his home. But anyway, New York never gave you that time. You didn't have that time. You didn't. You it just wasn't the place where you could like chill out and start a band and then eventually think you're going to come to. Nah, it all happened. And not only that, not only soul and funk. Same with jazz.
Yeah, bebop came from New York.
Well, did it?
Yeah, that's what I've always read. And then
No, I
hard
mean, look,
bop.
where is Miles Davis from? The Midwest.
Good
Where
point.
where is Charlie Parker from? The Midwest.
I always thought he was from New York. Man,
No,
I'm
man.
bad. Sorry
Charlie
about
Parker
that.
is from like Kansas City or something. And I
Wow.
know for a fact that Miles Davis is from East St. Louis.
Yeah,
You gotta be from somewhere else to be able to hone your skills and to get at least in the 60s and 70s. Then something clicked. Disco died, you know, disco died, and there was space for something else to happen. And that something else to happen wasn't musical. All those other great bands, James Brown, the Ohio Players, Funkadelic, they were musical. They were trained musicians. They were skilled in composing music. What happened in New York, and I'm just kind of off the top of my head here, though, what happened and why it happened in New York is because New York is a place where things synthesize and things have a way of coming up with new paradigms to create and crate digging and finding other people's music and making it your own was a perfect thing for New York. You didn't have to be a musician. You didn't have to be. You had to be a poet with some flow, with some rap, with some game. You had to be a poet. A lot of people don't realize I'm old and I'll be 70 in this month.
you don't look it.
We didn't call rap when rap came out, and James Brown, thank you. Rap was about talking to a girl. Yo, let me rap to you. Does he have a good rap? New Orleans, thank you. The Meters, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, I love the Meters. Oh, New Orleans was the funkiest. New York didn't have any of that. What New York had was smarts and genius and aggression and uh, coming up with like ideas of like, we're all mixed here together. We're all doing this stuff together. Let's dig through the boxes. Let's dig through the crates and let's synthesize beats and turn them into something else without having to have any kind of musical skills, without being singers. There's no singers coming out of New York, really. Not like there is in the rest of the country. They're rappers. They're poets. Like the last poets, Okay, now who is from New York is Gil Scott-Heron,
Yep.
but he's not even, he was born, I think he was born, he lived around a lot of
Yeah.
different places.
He living in Chicago for a bit too,
Yeah.
and I know his one parents Caribbean and his other parents from here, culturally. But I know he lived in New York, and this it's funny because it's him, Last Poets, and then the Watts Prophets on the West Coast. I'm friends with Amde, and he tells me stories about about even being among the first to even use rap on an album, at least calling their music that.
Yeah, but
And then of course,
that's a little bit bullshit. I don't agree with, and this is my opinion. Hate me if you
no,
want, but I don't I don't like to. No, I'm talking about the audience here, but I don't see the Last Poets as people have said as progenitors to rap music. It's not true. The Last Poets were part of a thing that we were doing in high school in the late 60s, early 70s. It was protest. It was college. It was college educated black kids who were speaking out against the establishment, against capitalism. And there was a way that the delivery was like this, and it was like,
Yep.
say man, ba ba bam, ba da 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 da. It was a sing-song delivery, and a da 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 da, and there was no yo. Nobody said yo back then because yo didn't come out until Rocky. It was all about what was the word that instead of we said yo, we would say, I'll think of it.
Dig.
The progenitors of rap were 1930s and 40s and 50s
Jocko Henderson.
R&B DJs. Exactly.
Jocko Henderson, Jack the Rapper, all
was
those.
about,
Yep.
exactly. Rap was about fun. The early rappers were about hyping the DJs, having a party, and it was just like those early R&B DJs and later on DJs, soul DJs, hyping records. They hyped the early rappers, hyped the band. Early DJs or R&B DJs hyped the record, and they did that in the same way. The Last Poets were a hyper political Black Panther Party type revolutionary type thing, and their thing was sing song, and it was not, that's not hip. Now Gil Scott-Heron was very much part of that world, that sing song style, and that the revolution will not be televised. And when he was connected to rap, and he was interviewed about that, he said, this rap has nothing to do with what I do. That's Gil Scott-Heron's own
It's
words.
funny that you say that though, because I know Amde from Watts Prophets, and he doesn't associate himself with hip hop. He just said we were actually rap, like we rap. We basically they say that they coined that term, and they were doing the same political thing. And he told me the same thing about with the Last Poets. They never called themselves even rap, you know. He's all, well, we were actually putting that Rap in Black as like their album, you know, but they'd been doing that. So he's all like, if you
know them that much. I don't know them that much.
Amde, dude, you gotta meet Amde. He's amazing, man. I'm supposed to be interviewing him soon, but I know him, like we've talked about this, and he's all, yeah, I'm not a part of the hip hop thing, but I am a part of the tradition of rap, which goes even before me. But we coined that term as a musical genre for what our style was. And it's interesting to hear the different views, because Last Poets don't claim it. And it's funny that you're saying that about Bill Scott.
Sometimes they do. I've seen some of the Last Poets. I think they claimed it only because someone put it on them, and then they said, okay, we'll take it. But they're more in the ilk of Gil Scott-Heron, and you know,
love that stuff, man.
You know what we used to say back in those days, like, wow, man, like, wow. Like, we didn't say yo, we said like, wow. That was a whole different thing. But anyway,
man, y'all used to say dig too, right?
Dig.
It's the reason I said that.
It's so weird that yo came out of Rocky, because nobody said yo.
Funny. I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, that's where yo comes from Rocky, the movie.
Some cats, let me see what the audience is saying. Tom Brown, Jimmy Castor, yes, James Brown, South Carolina, and Vash mentioned the Lockers. Shouts to them. I met Don Campbell, rest in peace. And they mentioned a bunch of cities. Sorry about that. This thing is on one. Okay. Look masterful like always. Talking about you. Come back to the interview with the question. Well, hey, here's the thing. Y'all could also ask questions too. Who said that? What's this cat's name? Musaye. You can ask some questions too. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Mr. Holman is here, and it's just, it's amazing. Like, because I know you grew up in the city right next to mine. That's why I was tripping off of him. Like, wow,
no, I didn't grow up. Listen, no, I was an Army brat.
Oh, word.
So I grew up all over Europe and the United States. I never grew up anywhere.
Oh,
wow. Yeah, I only lived in Carson for 2 years.
Man. And you're right next door to us, Long Beach, man.
The Mud Club had hip hop for sure. We as a matter of fact, the first time that I met Bambaataa was, I'm pretty sure that Fat Five Freddy at the Beyond Words show had hired Bambaataa to come down and play records for the Beyond Words show. That would have been 81. And then I brought, after Fat Five Freddy had brought Bambaataa and some Zulu Nation people down. I brought like some B-boys. I brought IBM Incredible Break Masters down to Mud Club. I brought Lonnie Wood or AKA Phase 2. I brought DST
Love
to
Phase
perform
2.
down at the Mud Club. So yeah, the Mud Club was definitely open spot for hip hop for sure. While it lasted,
Would you see?
the Mud Club was over by '82. So
Do you see hip hop as a part of that avant-garde scene? Even though I know, you
yeah,
know, that's awesome.
hip hop is as avant-garde as anything
Yep,
downtown did. And when you listen
exactly.
to some of these samples, it's just so far
Yep.
out. It's so experimental. It's so experimental, man. When you look at some of the graffiti that's been built from the explosion of hip hop, when you look at some of the producing, some of the music that the DJs have produced and the samples that they've chosen, and the poetry that these MCs and rappers have used, they're as far ahead as any surrealist movement.
Yep.
You know, New York in the '80s was a belle epoque. That means a beautiful era, like Paris in the 1920s, when you had, when you had people like, Picasso busting out, and Satie, amazing artists.
Oh, oh, it's freezing. Okay. I don't know why this is freezing.
Hello,
Okay, let's
hello.
see. Oh, I was gonna say, I'm like, you froze for a second. I'm like, what's going on?
I mean, yeah,
Um,
Paris in the '20s, you had, Picasso, Josephine Baker, you had Satie, Man Ray, you had this incredible movement of music and art, but mostly art, dance, everything else. It never to be equaled again until New York City in the '80s. It was a belle epoque. You not only had the downtown art scene producing people like Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring, Kenny Scharf and Keith Haring and Kiki Smith, and you had the downtown music scene, the Lounge Lizards and DNA and Liquid Idiots. They were called Liquid Idiots before they were called Liquid. We played with them. Gray.
wow.
But then you had what was going on uptown. All that's happening in one decade. It's unparalleled in human history. By the way, I'm gonna have to come on. I can't stay on too much longer. I'm gonna have to, but I'm happy to come back on if you ever want me to come on again at
Yeah, that'd
another
be
time,
rad.
and we can
I
continue this conversation.
that'd be mad cool.
Musave, New York
I
was
did
a
have
belle
one
epoque.
question. I did have one more question
Yeah, maybe
before.
like 10 minutes. 10 minutes if you
Yeah,
don't mind, if that's okay.
that's fine, man. I had one question about Beat Street since I knew that you're a writer. And we could come on the next time and talk about graffiti rock too, because we didn't really get to cover it as much. But with Beat Street, I've always, ever since I saw Beat Street first as a kid, then I saw Style Wars, even though I know that came out before. Was Beat Street based off of any of the guys in that? Because I know Shy 147 passed, and also Cap One seemed like what Spit was, like I just had to ask that.
Yeah, there was connections like that. Uh, Stephen Hager, who was an editor and publisher of High Time magazine, he had written a script that really the film was based on, or it was initially supposed to be based on. It was a pretty rough script, and they wanted something more commercial, so they brought in some Hollywood writers, and they interviewed me and a bunch of other people like that to kind of get this idea of a story. There were people like who's the guy who would write over everybody, like Cap One or
Cap
somebody?
One, yeah.
Yeah, like that's kind
Lucille
of what
Ball hairstyle.
that's kind of what Spit's based on. But by the way, Beat Street is 40th anniversary was last year,
Happy
and I don't know if you
birthday, man.
realize it
Happy
or your
birthday to
audience
it.
knows this, but we're bringing Beat Street to Broadway.
What?
Yeah,
That's
it's going to be a
awesome.
Broadway musical. Hopefully, in the next 2 years, sometime in the next 2 years, it'll be on Broadway. So someone
That's
says,
cool, man.
"What are you obsessed with these days? Are you obsessed?" I'll tell you what I'm obsessed with. I'm obsessed with life. And there's music from the '50s and the 60s and 70s, nothing to do with hip hop, that I'm obsessed with. I love the Cocteau Twins. I love, I love broadcast
Well
and tape.
broadcast.
My boy Todd Rundgren is one of my best friends. Actually, he actually is on one of my He's on this album here.
Didn't he just had a birthday, right?
Yeah, his birthday's in January.
Yeah.
That's right. I forgot. I didn't wish him Oops. Oh, no, I think I did. Anyway, he's my boy. I'm obsessed with anything good. I'm obsessed with art. I'm obsessed with films. My wife will tell you, I mean, I bore her to death with my film obsession. I'm a big film hound. I'm obsessed with anything that makes me feel good.
That's awesome. I had one more question, and then I had when it comes to I want you to give some advice. We always have our guests give advice to people. As far as especially being a black content creator or just a creator in general, do you feel like at times like a lot of our contributions are basically ignored or kind of like shoved
Taken
aside?
for
Do you feel
yeah,
that way? I'm sorry?
taken for granted.
Yes. Even not just because I do this thing with the rock and roll, but I'm also in the hip hop, and I mean I'm in all kinds of music. I'm a musician and also a dancer myself. I feel like a lot of times, whether it be not just hip hop, but rock and roll and like a lot of other stuff, like it seems as if we have to fight harder to kind of show people where the roots of a lot of the music that we created was. I mean, it's from like, and I feel like a lot of people either want to kind of other everything when it comes to our contribution and our innovation, or they just ignore it in general. Like, how do you feel
Well,
about that?
well, that's a loaded question, but I think that the simplest answer is that our history in this country, as initially as slaves, going on for 400 years, and Jim Crow for 50 years more, and it's our presence here and our presence potentially, or our presence here as equals to whites is something that they can't really tolerate. I mean, it's just they can't. Even liberals. I mean, I hate to say this,
No,
and I hate to be
say
too
it, because I'm
controversial,
on the same page with that.
but but
Both.
we for us to be equal to Europeans is an affront to, and such a hard thing for them to get their heads around, that it causes this incredible cognitive dissonance for them. And so the only way to handle it is to continue to marginalize us, and to question our, to make everything about DEI and whatever. I mean, it's funny. It's so sad about the
So,
plane that went down,
yeah.
and then people want to say that's a DEI situation. The weird thing is, when on the list of people who benefit from DEI, we're seventh. Black people are seventh on that list.
We're always
First is white women.
at the bottom,
Second is veterans.
literally.
We're not. But they. I'm sorry. This becomes very political here, but
No,
but
speak on that. We do that. We speak on these things because it affects our community. Like I feel that with music a lot. I feel it with rock and roll. I feel it with hip hop. I feel like a lot of our contributions in jazz, rock and roll, and hip hop, and even country, have been basically people trying to all lives matter it. I'm not saying you're doing that by giving props to people that you work with. I do the same. I work with a lot of different people, even in our genres, but I feel like some people really like go out of their way to kind of like basically say, hey, you know what? Your contribution doesn't mean anything.
well,
And it's just kind of like,
because if they say that it does mean something, then they have to accept us as equals, and they I don't think that that's something that's going to ever happen anytime soon in a way. And here's the thing, and I throw this out there to white America. You have to make a choice here. I think this is my best answer to you. You're going to have to make a choice between your privilege and democracy, because you can't have both. You can either have your privilege or you can have democracy. And you're starting to see now where privilege is taking us, where it's taking us
Man.
with Trump. You're starting to see it now. So you have a choice. You can either stick to privilege and accept and have to and be forced to accept fascism, dictatorship, autocracy, or embrace democracy, which won't be easy either. It'll be uncomfortable for you, and accept the fact that we're all equal or deserve to be treated as equal, whether we are or not. We deserve to be treated as equals, and then we have a shot at keeping this country together. If not, forget it. If you hold on to your privilege, the country's not going to last. We're going to go into a civil war, and hell's going to we'll never recover. Even if Trump can't be reelected, which he's going to try to be, change the Constitution to have yet a third administration, or fourth, or never stop being the president. Let me tell you something. If you cling to your privilege, in spite of the fact that it's going to bring a dictatorship, you're going to get screwed too. You're going to be in a world of hurt with the rest of us. So you might as well embrace democracy and let go of privilege and say, I'm willing to share my privilege with everybody. And that's not going to be easy, because this is 500 years of this. How do you break that habit? But that's what you're going to have to do.
Well, the thing for me, I want to make sure that I'm paying tribute to all my brothers and sisters wherever they are. And we've innovated so much, man. And I mean, all the genres of music in America rest on our shoulders.
Yep.
And when it comes to culture and stuff, and I'm not relenting when it comes to representing our culture within music, dance, and anything else. So that's one of the reasons that I do this. And I've been doing this for probably about over 10 years.
One important last thing I'd like to say, having someone who grew up in the military, my father's an Army officer, having lived around Europe and the United States, moving all the time, every 18 months I was somewhere else. And so I've seen and met a lot of people, a lot of different cultures. And I can tell you, in my opinion, that there's no other minority in a country the way Black people are, African people are in America. There's no other minority, for example, say Turks in Germany, or Koreans in Japan, or whomever, whatever minority that's in a larger culture. No other minority in any other country, in my opinion, has done more to change the world and have made a bigger impact on the world than Africans in America, Black people in America. What other minorities has done that?
I agree with you. I mean, and people think that we're being divisive by saying that, but it's not. It's just, we're just saying, hey, we fought for not only ourselves, but so many others. We made we're the moral face of this country. We've created things that we've never gotten credit for, and people are still trying to take from us now, including hip hop. That's and rock and roll. Like, dude, I'm a descendant. You know, my mom's side, like, we're related to like people like Little Richard. You know, that's my mom's cousin. And think about all the stuff that he went through, you know, like, oh, even the Grammy thing, that was just the tip of the iceberg. So for me, when I see that, and then seeing like even the work that you've done, I want to make sure that I highlight all of it. Like, I'm not playing, you know, so I'm glad that you came on this. And I want to also say this too. I want to ask, like, what advice would you give the world right now? And we could continue, because there's some other stuff I wanted to cover, but this was a great conversation, you know.
I'm every month I'm going through something different, you know. Like, I just saw one of my favorite films, recent films, Defending Your Life by I forgot his name now, Albert Brooks. And the film is basically about this guy who finds himself dead in Judgment City, where he has to defend his life. And if he's deemed to be too cowardly in his life, he's going to have to go back to Earth and try it again. and it's really based on, I suppose, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but it's this idea of don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, because life has so many scary things that it sends to you, and it's fear-based decision making that holds us back. When we make decisions based on fear, well, I'm afraid if I do that, that's going to embarrass them, or if I'm afraid I do that, I'm going to lose money. If I do this, I'm afraid. Don't make fear-based decisions, or try to be aware of them when you do, and try not to do that. Try to be courageous in your life. Try to recognize the moments when you make fear-based decisions, and try to instead stand up and be brave and say what's meant to be said and do what's meant to be done, in spite of the risks and in spite of the ramifications. You know, fear-based decision making is not the thing anymore.
Right on, man. Right on. Well, heck, if you're down to do it again, I'm down to rock again. And thank you for coming out. Thank you for making time. And I know that you've been, going through stuff, especially with the loss. You give him the shout out if you'd like, the brother
yeah.
that,
Little Lep.
Yeah,
Little Lep, my boy, my closest friends, and that was him there. This is him here. He was one of my closest friends in the New York City Breakers. Yeah, he helped me put the crew together, along with Lonnie Wood with Phase 2. We all were masterminding this, along with Floor Masters, and they were the core of the crew. It's a long story. I'm gonna have to run off because I've got my wife's like going, I've got dinner on the table.
Thanks
but I would be
again.
happy to come back and speak again and talk with you.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot. Thanks, brother.
Right.
God bless. Be safe. Peace.
All
Black
right.
history of rock and roll. Black history of rock and roll. Black history of rock and roll. We out. Peace.